Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to BVA and the Animal Welfare Foundation for inviting me to speak. I need to confess, I am not a welfare expert. There are plenty of people out there, half of them in the audience probably, who know huge amounts more than I do. But I do have a brilliant welfare team and I've relied heavily on them. So if it goes well, it's down to them. If it goes badly, it's my fault. I wanted to start by thinking why animal welfare is important at all. And in setting the scene, I'm not going to focus purely on non-traditional companion animals or exotics. Forgive me if I say exotics. Gandhi said that the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way it treats its animals. And I think that's absolutely right. If we look back in time, civilizations, the more advanced civilizations, tended to treat animals better. Now, I want to be part of a great nation, so I think we do have a duty to drive forward animal welfare and to treat animals well. There are a number of animals that we keep, obviously, traditional pets, exotic pets. But what counts as exotic or non-traditional? The definition of traditional is quite challenging, and you'll hear a recurrent theme in this talk are rabbits. They are traditional, but we actually keep them very badly, very often. Companion animals, pet animals, are they the same thing? Are horses pets? And then, of course, agricultural animals and working animals. And I think, for me, one of the important things is, are animals a basic human right, or are they a privilege? I think they're a privilege, but I suspect if you went out and asked the majority in society, they would think they were a human right, and it was their right to keep an animal if they wanted to. So just a little bit of background. Number of pets in the UK. You'll see from that if you add fish in tanks and fish in ponds together, there's something like 40 million fish kept in this country, 9 million dogs, 8 million cats, going right down to 5,000 primates, insects, rats. I think one of the worrying things, though, is we don't actually know how many. These numbers are put together based on information from pet food manufacturers, trade associations, representative organisations. We don't know exactly. Now, it'll get better in some places because with compulsory microchipping of dogs, in time we should have a better estimate, but it probably will never be more than that, a good estimate. And then moving on to non-traditional companion animals. These are generally considered those which are not traditionally kept, and where appropriate knowledge and resources to be able to care for them and to provide for their needs are not easily accessible. That's an interesting one. We've already mentioned, or I've already mentioned, rabbits and traditional animals. But it would seem that even some of the traditional pets that we have, people don't give good information at the point of sale, at the point at which you get them. It's also worth noting that the pet industry is just that. 15,000 people, roughly, are employed as a result of humans keeping pet animals. There are a lot of pet shops and specialist aquatic centres. It is important for the economy. Okay, it's not on the same scale as the sale of whiskey or some of the other bigger things, but it is important for the economy. We need to bear that in mind. So why do people keep animals? I think everybody would recognise there are benefits to humans from keeping animals, but are there benefits to the animals? It's widely accepted that having a cat or a dog can provide essential companionship to somebody who perhaps isn't seeing other humans very often. There's education. Having cats and guinea pigs certainly taught my children about life, death, breeding, because when you have the conversation about why the cat needs neutered, you explain a little bit more to them. There are the mental health benefits. I know for myself, going home and talking to the cat or talking to the horse is sometimes preferable to going home and talking to my family. The family invariably try to tell me what I should have done or what I should do in future. The horse just sits there and finds out if I've got polos in my pocket, or the cat sits at the fridge and says, well, when are you going to get round to opening that and putting some milk in the bowl? So there are mental health benefits. There are the physical benefits, mucking out horses or riding or walking the dog. And then there's the biological fascination. Who can deny that it is fascinating trying to breed fish or to learn about a new species? But at what cost to that species? And then, of course, there's the status symbol or the fashion accessory. I'm probably showing my age talking about Dulux dogs, but there was a time in the past where everybody wanted a Dulux dog, simply because of the adverts. Or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which led to a craze for terrapin keeping. But it's not new. I think if you go back to Dickensian times and think about Oliver, Bill Sykes' dog was a status dog. We maybe didn't call it that, but it was. So whilst we may think that people keeping pit bull type or Staffy cross types are status symbols, this isn't new. But there are negatives. What about the poor animal welfare? Poor health. Again, I'm back to my favourite rabbits in hutches that can't hop. And they're hard work. Even in my own family, we had guests at the weekend who admitted that they hadn't been prepared for how hard work 2 rabbits were. They were given poor information at the point of sale and encouraged to get 2 male rabbits. It's cost them a fortune getting them neutered and keeping them apart and stopping them fighting. It's cost far more, and these are not stupid people, a social worker and a careers advisor, but they hadn't thought it through, or they hadn't got the advice before they got them. How much worse is that going to be for animals where we don't understand the basic biological needs? And then there's the cost to society. Some figures, okay, not terribly up to date, but going as far as 2014 shows a rising trend in people being admitted to hospital from dog bites or being bitten or struck by other mammals. Fortunately, bitten or crushed by reptiles or venomous snakes and lizards is fairly low, but it is interesting to see that hospitals are keeping these records, and it's not an insignificant number. So, plagiarising the PAW report, and thanks to PDSA for letting me do this. Sorry, I'm looking at the red thing here, but I don't think it ever went from red in the first place. Thank you. Just panicking slightly. Owners do underestimate the cost of keeping animals. That's animals that we think we understand. What about the bearded dragon that we don't understand very well? It's amazing. People don't know what horses eat. I did a little mini survey at Pony Club and said to a bunch of 12-year-olds, what do horses eat? And I think only 2 about 30 of them said grass or hay. Everybody else was talking about fancy things that came out of bags or carrots from the supermarket. People don't always understand the basic biology or don't think about it. And yet, they think they are well informed. They think, how hard can it be? Everybody does it. As I say, much worse with animals where we don't understand the basic needs. So, how good is our welfare? Again, using the PAW report, 2.7 million dogs don't get off the lead for exercise on a daily basis. Again, I have friends who have a dog that, yes, they walk for miles and miles and they put in a harness and it pulls them up hills and things, but it doesn't always get off, it doesn't that often get off the lead because they're worried it'll disappear and not come back. I'm sure that's not good for the welfare of the animal. Lots of dogs are left alone for prolonged periods. That's why I don't have a dog. I couldn't look after it properly. And yet, I feel I'm in a minority. Lots of people get them, and it's acceptable to be in cages or shut in the office or in the car or wherever. I'm not going to mention rabbits again. And then there's the added complications of the non-traditional species, where humidity, lighting, heat are much more important than they perhaps are for some of the mammals that we have traditionally kept. So we have legislation. Obviously, as a government vet, legislation is something that I'm acutely aware of and involved in developing. Is it good enough? We have the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act. And here, just to play devil's advocate, I'm going to say I believe there's something similar in England and Wales, usually because Scotland's the add-on that's forgotten about. And that has basic requirements, but is it enough? There's pet animal licensing, but the Pet Animal Act for licensing is from the 1950s. Is that good enough? So I think the reason I'm invited to speak is because Scottish Government stuck our heads above the parapet last year and spoke about reviewing animal keeping, including the possibility of doing something about non-traditional companion animals. This was widely represented as Scottish Government are going to ban the keeping of exotic pets. What we actually said was that we were committed to review the animal welfare legislation and that we would be taking information and advice from a wide variety of sources. However, it was widely represented as hands off my hobby. Tell UK political parties that fish make good pets too. I don't deny that. I just want to make sure that if we're keeping fish as pets or whatever else, that they're kept well, that they're not suffering for our benefit. Another one, hands off our hobby. And then the animal rights groups want to prevent people from keeping exotic or wild pets, and we should be under no illusion that this includes fish. Well, as I say, it's more important to me that whatever we keep is kept well and is not disadvantaged by the fact that it's of benefit to humans. It's not the keeping per se, it's how we keep them. So, there are a number of areas where there are disagreements. Largely, these disagreements are caused because we don't have good and robust information about how to look after species. It can be all take and no give. I'm back to my rabbits again, but they are cheap and easy to keep very badly. Attitudes to animal welfare have changed. Society has changed, but not everybody within that society has changed. It was perfectly acceptable in about 1900 for animals to be a commodity, and the only thing that was important was human gain. Now, they're sentient, we recognise that they're sentient beings. It's not that they've changed, it's our attitude that's changed. And they have needs and rights. I don't particularly like the term animal rights. I think rights usually go with responsibilities, but there's no doubt that they have needs that need to be met. Part of the problem, as I see it, is that as a global society, the world is shrinking. We all travel by air. We can go wherever we like. We can be exposed to new and unusual. We can stand out from the crowd. Who doesn't think the meerkats and the adverts are cute? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should keep them as pets. There's computer technology and instant access. You want something, you can go onto Amazon at midnight and get it delivered, if not the next day, then the day after. People are not used to waiting for things anymore. And there's the disposable economy. Another little anecdote. I've recently replaced a zip in a dress. The amount of time it took me to find a zip to put into the dress was crazy. And then the attitude of lots of people who said, well, why don't you just throw it away and get a new one? Maybe I'm unusual, but sadly, we do seem to live in a society where we can get things very quickly, fairly cheaply, and then when we get fed up of them, bored of them, we just throw them out. Oops, I got behind. So, what's Scottish Government doing? we're looking at and analysing conflicting evidence. Now, just like the EU referendum, there is no one simple answer. You'll get different stories from different sides, different perspectives. Everybody has an opinion. So it's not enough to say that we're simply talking to, on one hand, Libby, and on the other hand, Stan, and we'll take exactly what both of them say at face value and make a decision. We're going to talk to lots of different people. We're going to evaluate the evidence. We're going to make sure that what we're hearing is a wide range of views, not just what the Daily Mail or somebody else puts in front of us, and hopefully come up with a sensible answer as a result of a thorough thought process. So it's not just abstracts or headlines. The provenance of the information will be considered. And I should say that both Libby and Stan provide very useful information and are not in the category of Daily Mail. But other countries do it differently. Switzerland requires compulsory training before you can have a dog. I think that's great. I'd quite like compulsory training before you can have any animal. Possibly compulsory training before you have children, but I might not have been allowed mine in those circumstances, so I maybe shouldn't say too much about it. There are positive lists, which is great. A list of animals that you can keep. The problem with that is it becomes out of date very quickly. And is there a suggestion that if it's on a positive list, it's easy to keep and therefore anybody can have it? Whereas what we want is something that encourages people to think. Is it easy to keep? Is it hard to keep? Is it possible? Can it never be done? There's also negative lists where some are banned, but that won't cover the new things that are being discovered and the next new craze that comes along. So back to my Gandhi quote. The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. That's absolutely where I want to be. I think we are a great nation, but I think we need to work to stay a great nation. I'm not sure that what we currently have is good enough, and we need to look carefully at the evidence to make it better. So, brief discussion just before I finish. Are animals, keeping animals, a privilege, or is it a basic human right? I think it's a privilege. I think if you can't look after an animal properly, you shouldn't have one. But then, who decides? Should government be responsible for intervening to make sure that welfare needs are provided for? Or is that for somebody else to do? Government could limit the keeping of animals with either positive lists or negative lists or licensing or a whole pile of other things. But is that the right way forward? You'll realise I'm asking more questions. I'm not giving answers. That's for these guys to do. I think there are three groups in society. There are the people who know what to do, they want to do it, and they will do it. They might need a little bit of help, but they're you guys sitting in the audience. Then there's the biggest group who probably want to do the right thing, they're just not quite sure what that is. And that's probably my relatives who were surprised at the cost of keeping rabbits, or the people who don't let their dog off the lead. They absolutely want to do the right thing for those animals. It's just a bit hard. And then there are some who just don't care. And I suspect that those ones are the ones where legislation would help. For the others, it's about education, it's about information, it's about getting the message out there. So for me, the right way forward is to change people by persuasion. It's not to tell people what to do. I'm sure there are plenty of people, even in this audience, if the government says do something, you think, well, what's in it for them? Why are they telling me to do this? It can't just be for general good. Education, I'm sure, is the way forward. But who does that education? Is it government, or does that just turn people off? Is it groups such as the Animal Welfare Foundation? I suspect it probably is. And then legislation. Yes, legislation will make a difference, but only if it's enforced. Only if people are prepared to say, well, as in Switzerland, my neighbour's bicycle doesn't have a registration plate, or my neighbour got a dog without the 4 hours training he needed. So finally, we need to balance what's good and what's bad. I don't think it's black and white. I think there are good things and bad things on either side. I'm sure education is a huge part of the answer, but legislation on its own isn't going to work. So in summary, I think we all need to work together to come up with a way forward that will address the needs of the animals, that will make us that great society, that great nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for a very clear and thought-provoking scene-setting talk. And I'm sure Gandhi's words will ring in our ears as the day progresses. As Tiffany said, the real value of today is the discussion element that follows each of these great presentations. And so we have time now to take what I'm sure will be numerous questions and comments from the audience. So who would like to ask the first question, please? If you wouldn't mind, as before, just waiting for the mic and giving your name and if you're representing anyone.
Hello there, I'm Martin Whitehead and I'm a general practice vet, but I deal with exotics. First, you don't need to worry about your age and the Dulux dog, because the current Dulux dog is actually one of my clients.
Oh, right, okay.
You say you think that education will be very important. I know BVA and BVZS feel the same thing. Before I was a vet, among other things, I did a psychology degree. And in the field of psychology, educating people, just providing facts, is regarded as an extremely inefficient way of getting people to change behaviour. And we can all think of examples where it just didn't work, like trying to get people to wear seatbelts. You had to provide legislation, and talking on mobile phones, all those sorts of things. Personally, I think education in the form of providing facts is going to make basically no difference to the welfare of exotic pets. Obviously, other people might disagree with me, but I think that one is just a non-starter, effectively.
I think you're absolutely right. I say education, I mean interaction and communication, two ways, multi-ways. Just telling people what to do doesn't work, in the same way that just making something illegal doesn't work. We know that speeding is illegal, and yet many of us occasionally go slightly over the speed limit because we're in a rush or because the road's clear. It needs to be well thought out. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have some work going on with social scientists about how to communicate. At the moment, it's mostly with farmers, because there are things that we, government, are trying to do that should be blindingly obvious. Irradiating bovine viral diarrhea is an example. It will save the average beef farmer something like £1,500 and a dairy farmer £8,000 a year, and yet some of them are choosing not to do it. So we are working with social scientists trying to work out what the motivation is and how to get messages across, and by whom and how to do it. But any thoughts you've got would be most welcome.
My thoughts are not to depend too much on education.
Okay.
And use some of the other methods. As you probably know, I'm a fan of the positivist approach. But
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's another one here, please. Just two behind you, Erica. Cheers.
Peter Scott, Fish Veterinary Society and Companion Animal Sector Council. Firstly, I thought that was brilliant. It was a really good survey of the situation. Sorry, right, okay. Thought it was really good, brilliant survey. It was a shame to see the old figures presented in a way that they could be presented again as endorsed by Scotland, because those figures really are not that accurate. DEFRA started quite a nice initiative quite a number of years ago now, and I think you're doing the same thing in Scotland. And that was setting up sectoral councils. So we got sectoral councils with cattle, sheep, pigs, but they also brought companion animals into it. which was very good because it gave the opportunity for the companion animal people to learn how the agricultural sectors were working. Slightly different because most of the money in the pet trade, I'm afraid, is not with the animals, it's with the dry goods. But all of the companion animal sector groups are extremely enthusiastic and well-meaning. They want to keep animals well. They need help. And those groups have now been working quite closely with BVZS and other veterinary groups and other individual vets, submitting stuff to DEFRA and trying to build things like sectoral approaches, good practice guidelines, care sheets, information as part of this educational effort. Now that is happening, and it's been happening actively for probably 7-8 years. I appreciate it's not made as yet had much bite, but it's getting there.
Yep. The sector councils are actually UK-wide. So although they're led by DEFRA, Scottish Government do feed into them, and Scottish stakeholders are part of those groups. We're different sometimes when there's a good reason to be, but if it works for everybody to work together, then we absolutely wouldn't want to duplicate something like that. And so we are part of that wider group in all the different sectors. I think you're right, there are improvements being made. The difficulty is down to how that's translated out and who listens. We could talk about codes and guidance and who does what and how it's enforced. It's about getting the correct information and, as you've already said, how people take it up and how any legislation is enforced.
Thank you. In the spirit of the billing, we're now starting to tease out the differences of opinion of education and self-regulation versus legislation. So if anyone has further thoughts either of those perspectives, and also to say we've got 4 roving mics. So while David's speaking next, if anyone wants to put their hand up and we can make sure it's as free-flowing as possible. David.
David Catlow from the Blue Cross. I went to a presentation a couple of years ago in Germany, and it was delivered by a Dutch PhD student who'd done some work on behalf of government, sponsored by PhD, sponsored by the Dutch government, on educating farmers and why farmers weren't picking up the messages on good health, good practice, etc. And she'd come out with a very simple acronym, actually, which was very good, on how you change a mindset. And she used this acronym, which is RESET. The R is for appropriate rules and regulations, which of course we need to start, but those alone won't change behaviours. You need to educate as well. You need some social pressure. You need an economic impact, whether it's a positive impact, a benefit, or an impact, a fine perhaps. And you need some tools to support everything you're trying to achieve. And her message was, unless you address all those 5 bases of the reset, you won't change your mindset.
I'll bear that in mind.
Thank you. I think one here. Okay. And then next one, just on the 5th row, hand there. Thank you.
Diana Willoughby, a teacher and a vet, and I've done psychology. I think there was another quote, which is take a child of 7. So if we could introduce practical education into the school system, as some private schools have farms and everything, I think that's the way. Just talking to people maybe doesn't work, but children doing on a daily basis or weekly basis will make a huge difference, and they go back to their parents. It's probably too late for the parents.
There has been a campaign to try to get animal welfare education into the curriculum, but we've not succeeded with that. I think Scottish SPCA were taking it forward in Scotland. Libby might want to correct me if others were involved, but we have been trying, but the curriculum is so full of other things that it's not been accepted. Having said that, they are doing a brilliant job of going out there anyway and being invited along to do talks, to do hands-on sessions, and to try to get to children young, because I'm sure you're right. At that age, they're sponges. And well, I remember mine coming home and arguing black was white because the teacher said so.
Could I just ask, Sheila, does the opportunity to review the curriculum come at a known frequency, or is it occasional?
It's occasional. There have been so many changes in education, changing from one well, it was O-level, O grades even when I was doing them, to GCSEs, to standard grades, to whatever we're on now. Each time it's changed, there is an option to change what's in it, but there are options in between times. But it's largely down to individual schools wanting to do it at the moment.
Thank you. Next one.
Jackie Patterson, AWF rep for the North East of England and small animal and exotic practitioner also. Thank you for a very good first talk. I'd like to consider 2 points. The first is on the legislation. I think personally that the Animal Welfare Act, Section 9, actually gives us sufficient legislation if we were to enforce that properly, and that's perhaps something that Mike will deal with in his later talk. On the point of education, I'd probably like to make the point that I think the most important education we should focus on is on the education of vets. As a veterinary foundation, I think we should point out that an awful lot of vets just have no idea about exotics. And I see time and time again second opinions of animals that have not even had basic first aid care given to them, and the owners actually know that the vet has not provided appropriate care for them, and they're coming to me, and first of all I have to sort out the first opinion problems that have been caused by the use of, and I hate the word but I'm going to say it, the inappropriate use of a fluoroquinone with a well-known trade name. And I would just make a plea to the whole profession, let's look at educating vets before we start criticising other trade organisations and the general public.
Yep. I think as vets we need to recognise our limitations. We all come out supposedly omnicompetent and able to deal with anything. I know that in practice I hated nothing more than a sack coming in. You didn't know what was going to be in that sack, and I certainly didn't know what to do with it. I guess I was quite happy to say, I don't know, I'll need to find out. But for a lot of people, that's a scary thing to do. So yes, we need to recognise as a profession, some people are very good and have a lot of information, a lot of experience. Others have still to gain that. I can't remember what the second point was. Oh, yes. Yes, I think there are tools there. The problem is that it relies on prosecution ultimately. And for procurators who are dealing with, well, procurators in Scotland who are dealing with domestic violence or robbery or various other things, perhaps a rabbit that doesn't have 3 hops in its cage isn't a big issue. One of the things that we're looking at when we consult on changing the legislation would be the introduction of fixed penalty notices, which at least would allow those doing the enforcement to say to people, this is not right, there is a fine that goes with it. They can still choose to take it to court, but hopefully that would get the message out and people might take it a little bit more seriously. So feel free to answer the consultation when it comes out if you think that would be helpful.
Sorry, I think just for the sake of the recording, can we just capture that last little bit on the microphone and then we'll come to the next question.
So I deal with the legislation in England, which is slightly different and mostly enforced, I said unfortunately, by the RSPCA. I'm a great supporter of the RSPCA and what they're trying to achieve. There is a different way of enforcing it in England, but I think fixed penalty notices are a very interesting tool that could well be appropriate.
It's certainly something we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. Next one here, please, and then the 4th row back, just here.
Chris Lawrence of Sheila, if you had a positive list, how would you evaluate what was going on that positive list? And as a second part of that, would you see a place for a grey bit between the positive and the negative, that people with particular training and skills could keep species that were not on the positive list, but perhaps in that grey area in between?
I think the short answer to that is I would ask my welfare advisors what they thought. I don't particularly like the idea of lists per se. if we were going to list, I think a traffic light system would be much better than either saying this lot are definitely banned or this lot are okay. Because as I've already alluded to, there are things that almost by default would have to be on a positive list that actually we don't do a good job with at the moment, because although they're traditional pets, we've never quite learned to look after them properly. So I think for me, a traffic light system where some things absolutely anybody, well, no, not absolutely anybody, I'd rather that they demonstrated some sort of competence, but things that were fairly freely available, things that you needed to demonstrate a bit more, and things that could only be kept in certain circumstances with proof of ability is, or would be the way forward.
So would rabbits be on your amber list or my grey list?
Probably amber. I really think we do a very bad job with rabbits. I know that they've been traditional pets for a long time, but there are so many rabbits kept so badly that I think it's something we need to look at and not just accept that they're a children's pet.
Okay, we'll take the next one here. If anyone has been stirred and stimulated in a way that you really want to get something off your chest, we're probably coming to the last question, so put your hand up now, please. Oh,
hi, it's Alex Elliott from World Animal Protection. Just a couple of questions that relate to actually what was just being discussed. And also, I was really interested in your comment when you said that your position is not about how they're kept or whether they're kept per se. It's how we keep them that matters. But then relating to the point you were just saying about the traffic light system, if there are some species that, you know, it's just not possible to keep them humanely, like the welfare needs can't be met, do you think the Scottish Government would take a strong position and say, well, they absolutely cannot be allowed? I'm thinking about discussion around primates and so on that's happening right now. And just to add to that, a second question, again, relating to whether it's a wider question of the welfare issues of how they're actually kept, but how they actually are sourced. So is the analysis that the government's doing the Scottish Government's doing right now, looking into the murky area of wild caught versus captive bred, the conditions in which exotic animals might be being brought into the country, and because there are welfare concerns there as well.
To take the second point first, yes, it should be all the way through, not just once the owner has it. Looking at different figures, you could say that the death rate in reptiles is anything from 3% to 75%, depending on where you start counting. So it does have to be from start to finish. That's the first thing. Legislation is made by ministers, so as officials we gather information and we put that information forward, but ultimately it's Parliament who decide, and that will be based on either a positive or negative procedure, but it will go through committees and things to make sure that the majority of those in Parliament are in favour of it. So it's not as simple as what I would like to do. It will come down to parliamentarians.
Okay, I know these themes will certainly be developed throughout the course of the discussion, so one last short one, please.
I'll make it short. Polly Taylor, independent veterinary anaesthetist. My main brush with the government has been on the ACMD regarding legislation and drugs, and it has struck me and my neighbour that there's a lot of similarities here, that basically prohibition doesn't work, education helps, but on its own it doesn't work. And what we need to do is change society's attitude by making them want to or not want to do something. And I'm not sure how it's done really, and it does take time, but we have done it to a certain extent with smoking and with drink driving. It's now not acceptable to drink drive in many societies. It's not acceptable to smoke right up your neighbour's nose in many places. So we can do it. And it seems to me that it's a combination of them all, and I love that reset idea, that you look at them all and you make people want not to keep the really difficult pet and so forth.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think that sums it up,
Yep.
really.
Perfect. Okay, a very warm thank you to Sheila Voas.